you're here because what she did. You're here because of what she did on October 3rd, 2021. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear a lot of facts. You're going to be asked to use your reason and your common sense to filter through it and render a just verdict. And you're all equipped to do that. But there's a famous quote that will help in that process, help in your process. And that's, let us take things as we find them. Let us not attempt to distort them into what they are not. We cannot make facts. All our wishing cannot change them. We must use them. And you will use the facts. And the facts are that on October 3rd, 2021, Christopher Dickerson was viciously and violently murdered in an unnecessary and unjustifiable way. And you're going to hear that law enforcement was dispatched to his home that he had purchased earlier that year by his neighbors, as they called, afraid that he was there, afraid that he was inside. And you're going to see the response from police as they get on scene.
Fire safety. Yeah, bro. Who's off the floor? Is there please anybody in there?
This is Officer Flores, Greeley PD. Is anyone in there? That answer is a resounding yes. That person that was in there is why we're here. That person that was in there was Christopher Dickerson. He was a son. He was a friend to many.
Objection, invoking sympathy.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
He was a colleague. He loved animals. He loved his dog.
Renewing our objection.
All right, Mr. Praley, if you'll move on, please.
And his life, taken by her hands, is why we are here. And ladies and gentlemen, the way his life was taken is going to be tough for you to see.
Objection, invoking sympathy.
All right, the court will I'm sorry, did you get a record of that, Cheryl? Okay, the court will overrule the objection.
But it's the way it was. It's the way it is. And you're going to hear that Christopher Dickerson was burnt beyond recognition. He was burnt so badly that he had to be identified in part by his dental records. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not as it first seems. Because Christopher Dickerson on October 3rd, 2021, was not killed by that fire. He was killed by a process of vicious and violent force. And you'll hear on the autopsy that it was noted that there was a particular thing coming out of his neck. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that that was a metal file. You're going to get to see it. And it had a handle on it. And you're going to get to see that the pointy part sticking out would be where the handle was.
Objection. Facts not in evidence can be approached.
Sure.
May I proceed?
Yes, please.
And so the pointy part sticking out of Mr. Dickerson's neck, you'll hear in regards to a likely handle that had broken off or burnt off. And that the blunt part of this file was plunged into the victim's neck not once. What you're looking at would have been the last one. It stayed in his neck. It's the only thing that makes sense. But what you'll hear from Dr. Burson, an objective pathologist or county coroner, is that he notes there are 5 separate and distinct stab wounds in Chris's neck. And you will be asked to consider that using reason and common sense. Plunging a piece of metal with such force into a neck and taking it out. Into the neck and taking it out. Back in, back out, back in, back out, back in. All in the neck region. All in a place directed at a person where you know there are arteries trying to kill. And you'll hear specifically through Dr. Burson that the carotid artery was hit. And that will be depicted by Dr. Burson. And he will opine what that would mean and how that's a bloodletting process and how much blood that would take and the coagulation in that area and the trauma. And you'll get to see the object, and the blunt end is what's going in his neck. And you'll get to think about that using reason and common sense when you're deciding murder in the first degree. And you're to consider all the evidence in light of your observations and experience in life. That's why you were selected. Now, a lot of this is not going to be a difficult decision as to me meeting my elements for you at all. And so we're going to go through that very quickly. But I, again, have to prove that the defendant in the state of Colorado at or about the date and place charge of October 3rd. We'll talk about the mental state of after deliberation and intent and how that corresponds with self-defense and specifically causing the death of Christopher Dickerson. And Dr. Burson will testify for you extensively. 5 stab wounds. 5 distinct stab wounds. He will opine that the cause of death was sharp force injuries to the neck and that the manner of death was homicide. Now keep in mind this autopsy takes place a day or two after they discover Chris being burnt that severely. Nearly 100% of his body is burnt. But you're going to get the whole picture in this case, the totality of the circumstances, the facts that you need to determine what a person was thinking when they were acting. Not just then, but total. That's going to be your job. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to get to compare that if and when you receive self-defense. And you're going to get to think, is that reasonable? Is that necessary? Does that make sense? Those will be the questions you are asking of yourself and others, particularly as to her actions on that day. So immediately after, Chris is stabbed 5 times in a close region in his neck. You'll get to hear what happened after. And to be very clear, the investigation took a different path, which I'm going to get into for you, as to how we get here, so that you understand why we're here today specifically with her. Okay? And so what you're going to hear is that when officers got to that residence after that fire and pull Chris's burnt body out, there's a lot of things that start making very little sense. And specifically, they go to the bedroom. And they see all these things laid out on a bed. You will get to decide if you think Chris lived that way or not. Okay? Well, what you'll get to see is that there's a particular item, a jewelry box, opened on the bed from Zales. And you'll get to see when those items are taken away, this void. You'll hear from experts in fire describing that, well, it's pretty obvious when you look at this picture, you can tell what was there at the time the fire was started and what wasn't, based on the different coloring. And that's October 3rd. That's what they notice. And so shortly around that time, the victim's father, Alan Dickerson, after he's notified about his son, and after being introduced to the Greeley Police Department, that they're investigating these circumstances, being introduced to Mr. Burroughs, Alan Dickerson starts providing assistance right away. And specifically, he helps him as a power of attorney for his son, helping with bank records, phone number, phone records, and Google location records. And you'll hear a lot about the Google location records. You'll hear from a lot of people that are much more tech savvy than probably you could imagine about your phones track a lot of things.
I'm sorry?
Objection, bolstering.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
People who specialize in technology are going to come in and talk about if you have an Android device that's connected to Google, you might be sharing your location at a lot of places. Maybe you know that, maybe you don't. But all those things are provided, and specifically Alan Dickerson goes into his son's account. He downloads those records and those locations, and he provides them to Detective Burroughs. What does Detective Burroughs do? He starts following all of those things. He starts tracking movement. He starts ordering records. He starts obtaining surveillance, bank records, places, locations, movement of travel, all these things. lots of sleepless nights. And what you're going to hear is that he's able to see that Chris, on that night, goes out to the bars downtown, right across the street. And you'll see Chris on the left, and you'll see him talking to a female who's later identified as Dolores V. Hill. And you'll see that she's discussing a phone, and there's going to be cameras at these places with times during these places, and he's using all of these things in conjunction with each other to figure out his location, his activities, and what he's doing, right? And so, for example, in People's Exhibit 81, you're going to hear that at the time of this exchange that's on camera, where there's this number that Investigator Burroughs, or Detective Burroughs, I apologize, that he's looking at the phone records, the movement, the surveillance, and he's able to see, okay, Chris and Dolores, their phones are connecting. He's able to say that I see him on camera, and he's able to track him and what he's doing, his movement. And ultimately, he follows him around downtown Greeley, and he sees Chris leaving on People's Exhibit 88. And he's looking for clues. And he sees this interaction from surveillance on People's 88. Now there's video. Not all video is going to be published. But there's this interaction with this silver Malibu and these distinct rims. And he sees this, and he puts that among things to look into. And he goes through all the other surveillance. And he then tracks back, who are those people in the silver Malibu? What do they look like? What's that car? All those types of things. And when he tracks all the way back, it comes to two people, two females. And he goes through this process, and he's able to say that the defendant is wearing the black. She's got this visor on. She's got her hair up in a bun. And this other individual is Hosanna Varela. And again, that process takes a lot of time of figuring out their specific names. But he knows that these individuals, based on their movement, are associated with that Malibu and that encounter that we just saw. And so what Detective Burroughs does is he keeps looking. And he sees that after this encounter, and after identifying those people, that Chris is heading home. We're walking away from the bars. And you'll get to see, maybe you recognize this, maybe you don't. It's going to be the window at the Rio right across the street. And you'll see Chris walk by it in Exhibit 90. And then right after that, you'll see that in dealing with that, there is a specific vehicle that's shown after Chris had walked by, and it's that Chevy Malibu. And then he's able to obtain surveillance that had been gathered in and around Chris's house on the early morning in question and the night before from 3 different neighbors, and he starts piecing this together, spending hours and hours of viewing this.
Bolstering.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
And what you're going to hear is that Detective Burroughs was able to identify, based on a variety of things and corroborating it along the way, that when he saw Chris walking to his car, ultimately he drives home, he pulls into his garage, and after he gets home, that Chevy Malibu pulls into his driveway. And ultimately they go inside for a while, and you're going to hear, again, at that point, sometime later, that the defendant, Hosanna Varela, and Mr. Dickerson leave. Again, they come to the names of these individuals later. But they leave, and he's able to look at phone records. That Dolores V. Hill that you previously saw at the bar exchanging phone numbers, that he goes, he leaves the house, and ultimately they're communicating, and they drive around, and ultimately he comes back. And you'll get to see surveillance footage that, remember, the Malibu had been parked in the driveway. Ultimately, they move it out of the driveway. They're lit up by Chris's brake lights as he's backing out of his driveway. And then you can use the Google location at 254 around 8th Avenue and 11th Street to show where Chris's phone was. The group then returns back to his house. Hours go by. And Detective Burrows, candidly, at that point, does not know what happens in that house other than what Dr. Burson had said.
Objection to this slide 403. Can we approach?
So he knows that Chris was stabbed 5 times in the neck, and he continues to watch the surveillance. And what was noted by initial officers, and what was noted by other people who look at this footage, knowing that they're looking at Chris's house and the surrounding area, is that ultimately one person comes out, goes down, and starts the car. And you'll hear from Detective Burrows after watching this multiple times that he notes that, yeah, this door opens. I see this figure consistent with the females. He differentiates from Chris, and he says, I see a female go, walk down, get in the car, but I didn't see 2. And approximately 3 minutes later, 3 minutes elapse, okay? And then a second figure comes out. Lights to the vehicle are shut off. Figure comes out slowly, walks down, gets into the passenger side. And they drive away. Calmly. Now, the interesting thing for you is that at that same time that you just saw those 2 larger females leave that residence and drive away, now be captured on several videos, Chris's phone leaves too. The 2 females leave and drive away, and Chris's phone leaves. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to get to hear about those locations. And you'll get to use that in conjunction with Dr. Burson's testimony. Chris didn't die of being burnt. He died by being stabbed 5 times. So there's no way that at that point, he's just giving his phone to people he had just met that night. Because that's what will come out. Chris did not know these girls. He had met them in that alley. They had gone back to his place. They had taken his life. They had taken his ring. They had taken his phone. and they leave. And that will form the basis for the burglary. The initial burglary is for the theft of his phone, of the ring, and other items. But there's more. There's more. There's burglary that deals with arson and tampering with Chris's deceased body. And what you're going to hear is that after leaving at 5:12, they drive around for a period of time, and they return. And when they return, they pull back into the neighborhood, pull outside of Chris's house. One individual on the passenger side calmly walks in, opens the front door to Mr. Dickerson's residence when he is dead. Does whatever she does for a few minutes and sets the place on fire. You'll see the return. It's a cul-de-sac, by the way. See him park. Slowly walk up. Open the door to a deceased Mr. Dickerson's house. Without authorization, without invitation, as he's likely laying there dead, having blood out. And approximately 2 minutes go by. You'll hear that no person was ever observed of getting out of the driver's seat. And 2 minutes later, you're going to see it, look at the window, and then watch the exit. Bright lights, flickering. Opening of the door, calmly walking down, getting into the car, and driving away. And the fire begins to go and go and go. You'll be able to look at those Google records, specifically see that lap, that Chris is on the ground, dead, but Chris's phone has made this lap, has returned to his residence, and leaves at the same time that vehicle leaves and drives off. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear a lot about technology in the city of Grady, specifically about automatic license plate readers. And you're going to hear that at approximately 5:41, 35th Avenue and 25th Street, that Malibu with the plate AER G95 is seen driving. And that location will matter because that connects all those dots. And that's used as an investigative tool for Detective Burrows. And that Google location that was provided by Mr. Dickerson continues to assist in that it shows that path. And ultimately, at approximately 6:13, looking at all the factors, Detective Burrows says something here based on automatic license plate readers and the path of travel. The car doesn't match anymore. And an automatic license plate reader is what it sounds like. It takes a picture of a person's plate, connects to registration, shows a time frame. It's a photo connected to a database. And so ultimately, Detective Burrows, who's very familiar with working auto cases, uses the location where he knows there'd be another automatic license plate reader and sees, hey, the timing works for this big Chevy Tahoe, plate CEB P61, and connects all those dots. Runs that registration, comes up with the people, starts looking at the two females that he had dealt with, and figures out who the two suspects are. Stacy Rodriguez, the defendant, and Hosanna Varela. And he continues to connect those dots, and ultimately, it progresses to make an arrest. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think a lot of the discussion detailed that we're going to be talking about self-defense. And you are to use reason and common sense in guiding you in that. You'll be provided the law. You'll be provided all the circumstances and facts. But you're also going to hear that on October 16th, nearly 2 weeks after this, there's an event that occurs. And keep in mind that these neighbors had been providing videos of what they captured, what they didn't. And you're going to hear that on October 16th at 7:46 a.m. on another ALPR in the 1700 block of 25th Street sees that Malibu. And Detective Burrows will be able to zoom in and opine that based on all the features, the earring, Miss Rodriguez's chin, a particular shirt she was wearing, that it's Miss Rodriguez. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll get to hear that at that same time, the footage that's being captured from those same residences catches that the defendant comes back to the scene of the crime. You'll see Mr. Dickerson's house. You'll see his windows boarded up after being burnt. She pulls right up by where she murdered somebody, stabbing him 5 times. You will get to think about a lot of concepts with self-defense. You're opposed to a lot of hypotheticals. This is reality. You will get the facts. You must use those facts. And ultimately, you'll get to decide how guilt and regret would ever play a factor. If you justifiably saved your own life, would you regret doing that? You're going to hear that on October 30th, 2021, when Detective Burrows writes for a variety of documents and databases, that he gets the defendant's Facebook records. And he begins reading them. And again, at this point, He just has them as suspects. And he discovers this after the fact. Facebook is not quick. He goes through this process that you'll hear about, and he's still doing his investigation, and he orders them so that he captures things at a certain point. And what you're going to hear is that the defendant, on either the 29th or 30th of October, UTC, you'll hear about that, you subtract 6 hours. The defendant writes, "I think that thing I did is getting to me now." Like the guilt and regret. And I can't even talk to nobody about it. Could have talked to him. Could have talked to the Greeley Police Department. Nearly 27 days after Chris was stabbed 5 times. That's what's going to be discovered. The investigation continues. And on November 11th, 2021, the defendant is arrested, as well as Miss Varela. And ladies and gentlemen, if the defendant chooses not to testify, you all swore that you would not use that against her in any way, shape, or form. I trust you with that. But you will hear that she made statements on this date. And she denies it all. So in the text message before, she says, "I can't talk to anybody about this. This regret, this guilt." She had the chance on this day.
Gotcha. So we're working on a case. You mind if I talk to you for a couple minutes about it? Okay. Does this person look familiar? No. Okay. Have you ever seen him before? No. Okay. Okay. Have you ever been to 23? Correction. It's 2413 15th Avenue Court, Greeley. It's over off like by 25th Street, 11th Avenue.
No,
What's that? Well, it's a house. Okay. She doesn't believe she's ever been to the 2413 15th Avenue Court address. She doesn't know anybody who drives her silver Chevy Malibu. Is that right? And have you ever driven a Chevy Malibu?
Never been to the house. Never seen Chris. Never driven a Chevy Malibu. Doesn't know anybody who does. And then she's told that she's being arrested.
Is there proof of that?
Yes.
Her response, after all that time, is there proof of that? And you'll get to factor that into your consideration. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear again that Hosanna Varela was also arrested on that day, and you'll hear that she provided an interview with her lawyers present. And ladies and gentlemen, she outlines what she saw, what she heard. And you'll hear confirming what we had from phone records, that they had not met before that point. She didn't know Chris. Stacy didn't know Chris. That's consistent with phone records because we never saw any interaction. That essentially just happened in that they were driving, Chris was walking, there's the discussion of going back to his place for an after party. And so they go back to his place, and he had some beer, he had some vodka. And according to Hosanna Varela, the defendant was giving him vodka while they were taking water, or part water. And you will get to ask yourself why that is, looking at all the circumstances. Why would you be feeding somebody an intoxicating substance that you weren't taking yourself? And make no mistake about it, that there's going to be a lot of blame cast on Christopher Dickerson. He was drunk. Very drunk. That's what his toxicology says. And he'll be blamed for that. And you'll get to decide if this was part of the plan. Hosanna Varela will make it very clear to you she never saw Christopher yielding a weapon. He never threatened to kill them, rape them, anything like that. That she doesn't recall any physical force by Chris. But is certain, no weapon, no threats, I'm going to kill you, nothing. And you'll hear that there was an argument, according to Hosanna, between Christopher Dickerson and the defendant. And ultimately, you're going to hear from Hosanna that according to her, Christopher was pushed. And then at some point, the defendant took a beer bottle over to him and smashed it on him. And that Christopher Dickerson was yelling for them to leave, pleading with them to leave. Ms. Varela will say, and has said, that she wasn't afraid that night of being hurt, that they could have left. There wasn't a hypothetical door. There was a real door. There wasn't a hypothetical car. It was theirs. It's parked outside. You'll hear the progression. And you'll hear that Hosanna Varela asked her to stop and leave. And you'll hear during the testimony of her that according to her previous statement, she had seen this object, the murder weapon, at Chris's house that was out, that it looked like a file of sort. She describes it as something that would be like used to sharpen knives. There was a handle. She thought it had white tape, wasn't certain, but she saw it. And ultimately, she put it underneath. But she says there was no need to kill him. There was no need. And yet Stacy Rodriguez did. She'll describe what that sounded like. She'll talk about seeing Chris bleeding out. Describes a death gargle. She'll describe that immediately after, Stacy seemed happy about it. And that instead of calling for 911 or anything like that, what was the first thing that Stacy Rodriguez started doing? She started going through his stuff. Opening cupboards, going into his room. So ladies and gentlemen, ultimately, you'll get the law as instructed in the end, and you will get to determine whether or not you believe it was reasonable. And was there a need for this imminent use of force to defend herself with no weapon, And that had to occur right then when a person was yelling to get out of my house. A reasonable belief, in order to have justified self-defense, you have to reasonably believe lesser force is just not going to cut it in this circumstance. You will get to determine those items as to what was reasonable, what was necessary, and what was appropriate. And there had to be this reasonable belief that there's imminent danger of being killed or receiving this injury. You'll hear the progression that the defendant asked her. In this progression, after the beer bottles, go get the weapon. You'll get to think about that. Deliberate, intentional action of asking for that. And Hosanna did. She'll detail all of that for you. What she heard, what she saw, and you'll hear, according to Hosanna, that then the defendant was moved. You'll hear that she was told to go out and start the car. The video will corroborate that. She discussed that items were taken. She will discuss driving off and then returning, staying in the car, and that the fire was lit. And ladies and gentlemen, they will blame her for all of this. Taking a deal with the devil. For witnessing this horrific murder. Receiving 32 years in the Department of Corrections. You'll get to decide who was the initial aggressor. Hearing that testimony. Looking at the testimony, the actions after, the evidence of flight, and the defendant's multiple statements. Multiple statements after the fact. And you'll get to compare what those statements looked like between those two girls. And you had been told that they were arrested. And while at jail, you'll hear that Hosanna got a note written on paper towel. And I know it might be hard for you to see. You'll get this exhibit, but I'll read it to you. I hope you kept the same story. You ain't dumb. I know they gonna trick you, but if you ain't see or do or hear anything, you're cool. You know, don't give in to they shit. Hang in there, babe. You'll be out soon. I just need to see how not to dig myself deeper. I know it's baby Joker's fault. It probably crossed your mind to say stuff, but then you going down too. Don't be stupid. Play dumb. It's all good, Turbo Muffler. LOL. You'll hear that in reference to this, I know it's baby Joker's fault, that's what the defendant calls herself. When she's referring to her as babe, you'll get to hear about Stacy and Hosanna's relationship. You'll get to hear that Hosanna had previously been in a relationship with a man she had 3 children with. And that the fire just wasn't there anymore in that relationship. And that Hosanna and Stacy had worked together, and Stacy was showing her all of this attention that was missing from her husband at home. And at a certain point, that relationship became sexual. You'll hear on that video when they're arrested, do you know, how do you guys know each other? Yeah, we're definitely more than friends. Would you call yourself a couple? Yeah, yeah. And you'll hear the messages between them. Hang in there, babe. You'll be out soon. I know it's Baby Joker's fault. The same person that writes at the bottom of that letter, provided in jail to flush. That's what the evidence will be. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that was not justifiable, that was not reasonable, that was not necessary. It was vicious, it was violent. And at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, you will know that Chris's death, his death in that living room, was only first-degree murder, followed by burglary, by stealing his stuff, followed by burglary for arson, and tampering with a deceased body. And I trust that after using all your reason, all your common sense, those will be the verdicts that you render. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and take our morning recess at
situations that cause panic and reactions. That's what this is actually about. And we talked about this a lot in jury selection. You were asked about drastic measures somebody might take in covering up something that was justified. And you all were asked, how would that make you feel? What does that make you feel about the justified act? And overwhelmingly, the consensus was people do things when they're panicked. That those drastic measures do not negate a justified action. But what they are drastic measures that were taken in a moment of panic, in a moment of under pressure, resulting from a trauma. That's what this is. And sometimes the pressure of a situation can be so insurmountable that nobody knows how to deal with it. Doesn't mean that actions are correct. Doesn't mean that one person in the same position might have acted the same way. Of course not. But sometimes the worst thing happens and a drastic measure is taken out of pure panic. So over the next week, you're going to hear that Ms. Rodriguez acted under pressure. Stacy, she reacted to a situation that she was presented with. She reacted in a way that was reasonable in the circumstances that she faced to defend herself, to defend the woman that she loved, to make sure that nothing happened to them. Protecting yourself, first response. You're going to hear that about 8 months later, from October 3rd, 2021, so we're looking in June, Ms. Varela, also, Hosanna, she acted under pressure. And she made a decision to save herself as well. And that context of what happened then is when she spoke with Detective Burrows on June 8th, 2022, and that proffer that Mr. Perelia had mentioned to you all earlier this morning. And then we also have the Greeley Police Department, and then of course, subsequently, the prosecution also acting under pressure, making a decision based on the limited information that they have and reacting to that. And they did that when they decided to take what Hosanna told them on June 8th as fact, as capital T truth, as that must have been what happened on October 3rd, 2021. I want to start off by providing you all with a little bit of context of who these people are, of the situation, of the relationships at the time. And so the prosecution had kind of alluded to this a little bit, that Stacy and Hosanna were together. They were seeing each other. But also, Hosanna was married to her high school sweetheart and had 3 children that are young. And so Stacy is 19 years old in 2021. Hosanna's 23. 4 years might not seem like a big age gap. But when you're that age and you're experiencing life at that age, those 4 years can be a pretty big gap. So Stacy, 19 years old, is living with her family. She's very close with her brothers and her mom. That's her life. Hosanna is older, right? She's 23. She's married with children. That's the life she's living. So they get together. They met at work, kind of like how we all meet people. Started as a friendship, and then ultimately gets intimate. They developed feelings. But then when they start dating and when they're together and they're experiencing this relationship together, Hosanna has to balance the fact that she's not divorcing, or she's not leaving, she's not separating from her high school sweetheart, but she's just trying to balance the two. So Stacy's in love with her and wants to be exclusive with her. Of course. But Miss Varela is also trying to balance the fact that she's not going to separate from her husband. So naturally, that's going to cause some tension in the relationship. I think that's understandable. So that's kind of the basis of their relationship. That's where we're at right now. When we think about the 4-year age gap and how that might play a part in this, you heard from the prosecution that on October 2nd, Mr. Dickerson was out at bars, and they had all met in the back of an alley kind of in downtown Greeley. Where this age kind of gap comes into play is the fact that Stacy, she's not legally able to drink. And Hosanna is a drinker. This is what she does. Also okay. But the age difference means that they have to find bars that Stacy's allowed to go in, that are 18 and up, that'll let her drink, where she's not going to get. So Hosanna, and through her relationship with Stacy, is they're figuring out how to make this work, right? Because she is 23 years old and doesn't have those restrictions. Stacy's 19. She's a few years off from that legal age of drinking. So this is the dynamic that they're also having to deal with. That's when those age differences do matter in a situation like this. You're going to hear that their relationship moved quickly. They moved in together within months of dating. And mind you, Hosanna is not separating from her husband in any type of official way, is not just exclusively seeing Stacy, but they're living together. This is exclusive. And understandably so, when you're trying to balance these things, the relationship becomes codependent and ultimately quite toxic. So this is the environment that we're in. And think of this when you listen to Miss Varela's proffer. Think of this when you listen to the way that Miss Rodriguez, Stacy, sometimes responds to police officers. So consider their statements, look at the body worn, keep this kind of situation, this environment in mind. The prosecution had said, starting off with a quote, "Let us take things as we find them. Let us not distort them." Contrast that when you listen to Ms. Varela's proffer on June 8th. Facts are distorted. The prosecution's theory relies on distorted facts. So let's talk about what a proffer is, what June 8th, 2022 looks like. Again, during jury selection, Mr. McCormick had asked you all, what does it mean to flip a co-defendant? And somebody had given a quite spot-on definition that said, flipping a co-defendant is if two people are charged in connection with the same crime, one of the parties will turn against their partner in the charges and provide evidence against them or agree to help them out in a case. And so that's exactly what Hosanna did. That was a great definition. And your job is to determine throughout this entire trial the credibility of those statements. And we talked about a little bit in jury selection that you get to determine the credibility, use your your life experiences, common sense, the way people react, the way they're telling their stories, the details that are there, the details that are missing, their body language. So you get to determine that credibility, and that also includes motive. Why is somebody saying the way that the story is? Why are they flipping a co-defendant? So for Ms. Varela, Hosanna, when she speaks with Detective Burrows on June 8th, 2022, she had been in the Weld County Jail for over 7 months, from November 11th, 2021 to June 8th, 2022. She is figuring out how to exist in jail. She is kept by herself more often than not. She's completely isolated. And use your real life experiences and your common sense of what does that do to a person, right? 7 months of panic in jail, looking at what the rest of your life is going to look like, sitting by yourself in a cell for more hours than not, spinning, thoughts are spinning. You're panicked. In jail, you don't have your own clothes. You don't have your own freedom. You don't have your own food. You don't get to walk around when you want. You don't get to call people when you want. And if you do call people, they're listening to your phone calls. Your life has flipped upside down. So for 7 months, that's the situation that Hosanna was in. And not just the jail. She had external pressures as well, because we've talked about her husband. He's not happy with the situation, because now he's out dealing with their 3 children and is solely financially responsible for them, solely emotionally responsible for them. He has all of that burden on himself, and he lets Hosanna know that. He does not let her forget that. So she's dealing with that pressure. Her kid's asking her, where is she? Why isn't she coming home? And he has to deal with that. And you're going to hear that Hosanna, she was worried about that. She was worried about the charges that she was facing, the fact that she was in jail with no opportunity to get out, the reputation that then her family was going to have after this. Those are things that she's worried about. And it's not just because of her husband, but also her sister and her mom. Because you're going to hear that her sister and her mom tell Hosanna over the 7 months that she's in jail that they don't want to share with her grandmother or any other family of what she's actually in jail for, because that's embarrassing. So this is what Hosanna is concerned about, the embarrassment. You're going to hear from an expert later in this trial that will give you a little bit more information of exactly what a proffer is, right? I think that definition was very spot on of somebody says something to get something in return, right? You flip on somebody to benefit yourself. And the prosecution had said that, well, 32 years in prison, that's a long time. It's a very long time. However, that's not the full story. That's distorting the facts. What Ms. Varela did agree to, and you're going to hear what she agreed to, is that, yes, she's serving a prison sentence, but if she comes here and testifies the way that they want her to, maybe it'll get lowered. That's a benefit. So you're going to hear from this expert who's going to tell you in a legal context that when somebody goes in for a proffer, it's not because the idea is just to get the truth out. The idea is that you get something in return. So that's the motive. She's embarrassed. Her family is struggling. It's not about Mr. Dickerson. It's not about the truth. It's about herself. I want you all to pay very close attention to the statements that Hosanna makes. That June 8th, 2022 proffer interview is 7 hours. It was a 7-hour interview. And you're going to hear that the first kind of hour-ish of this, Detective Burrows asked Hosanna, just tell me what happened. Tell me about you and Stacy. What happened on October 2nd? What happened on October 3rd? And Hosanna gives a narrative. She talks. She's got a lot of details. But what is very interesting is that first section of when she is just talking without any questions, without any interjections. Think about what those statements are and then compare them to what you will hear later when Detective Burrows says, okay, I hear what you're saying. Well, let me ask you about this, and let me ask you about this detail, and how do you feel about this? And then her story changes a little bit. And we start getting a lot of details. And a lot of details that are not rooted in reality. Details that are distorted. Details that make it seem as if we are living in a scary movie. And that is not the case. That is not reality. I will agree that the body worn you saw when officers show up on October 3rd is scary. That is horrible. What happened to Mr. Dickerson is horrible. But that is different. We have to remember logic, okay? So when you hear some details that Ms. Varela says after Detective Burrows is asking her questions, that's when she describes what happened with Mr. Dickerson inside that home, and she says that Stacy stabbed him in the neck, and then afterwards, she licked his blood and said, it's dirty. That her face was glowing. and that Stacy had blood underneath her fingernails for days and then went out in public and did whatever she was going to do and just live her life. We are not in a scary movie. This is reality. And so look at somebody's motive. Think about when these details are being added. They're not added initially. To save herself. The Greeley Police Department relied on what she said on June 8th. And you will hear that after that, there was no corroboration. The prosecution said Detective Burrows put in endless hours, sleepless nights. But you're going to hear everything he didn't do. You're going to hear everything that the Greeley police officers didn't do to try to make sure that what Ms. Varela said was actually true. And think about why they didn't do that. Because what if it didn't corroborate their story? Because prior to Hosanna talking with Detective Burrows on June 8th, 2022, the prosecution and the police department had absolutely no idea what happened in Mr. Dickerson's home on the night of October 2nd into the morning hours of October 3rd. No idea. So Ms. Varela gives them a story, right? Because she's sitting in jail for 7 months, thinking about how she's going to save herself and blame it all on Ms. Rodriguez. But we saw those videos. You can see one person is inside the car waiting. No person is acting alone. So think about that as well. So the prosecution and the Greeley Police Department, they also acted under pressure because they needed Ms. Varela's story. They needed her to make sure that their timeline, that their theory, that their distorted facts make sense. So Ms. Varela shares a lot of details with Detective Burrows. She says her sister was sent something on October 3rd. She talks about her husband. She talks about her mom. She talks about what her and Stacy do on the 3rd, the days after. Detective Burrows, in all of his hard work and sleepless nights, doesn't do anything about that. He doesn't contact the husband to see what he knows. He doesn't contact the sister to see what she knows. They don't do any follow-ups. And what's even more important is what you will hear is that Detective Burrows does tell Hosanna at one point during that 7-hour interview that he is trying to vet her for honesty. Because that is important. Of course that's important. But did he mean it? You're going to hear from a lot of different officers about the investigation that they did after Ms. Rodriguez and Ms. Varela were arrested on November 11th. You're going to hear from these officers that they searched Ms. Rodriguez's home, that they searched her clothing, they searched her vehicles. Think about who they didn't search, the other person that they didn't pay attention to, because it didn't matter. But when you hear about what they searched and what they found, listen to what the officers tell you why they looked for those things, why they looked for her clothes, why they went to her home, why they looked for certain things in the car and collected certain evidence, because that's important. And then think about all the reasons why they did those things, but then never followed through to see if their hypothesis were correct, never followed through to see if science would back anything. Why? Well, it's not going to fall with this distorted narrative, and so we're not going to do that. Have to keep in mind throughout this trial, everybody reacting under pressure and everybody panicking, because I think that explains exactly why we're here. So I want to go back to October 2nd and October 3rd. So we know that Ms. Rodriguez, Stacy, is 19 years old. She's dating a woman who's married with kids, and they're going out having a normal night on October 2nd. They're going out to the bars where they meet Mr. Dickerson in an alleyway. And Mr. Dickerson approaches them and says, you guys looking for an after party? I've got one. Great, no problem, that's normal. So that's what they're hoping they go to when they follow Mr. Dickerson to his home, is for an after party. And then it turns out nobody's there. There's no after party. It's just Mr. Dickerson, and it's Stacy and Hosanna. That's it. So this man, mid-30s, okay, these ages, they're important here, right? Use your life experiences. We're all in different life stages right now, right? Guy in his mid-30s invites this young girl over for an after party. And then you're going to hear what happened inside the home. And pay attention to all the things that the prosecution didn't tell you in opening. The prosecution said there was nothing physical in the house, no physical threats. Mr. Dickerson never did anything. Well, that's not true, because Hosanna tells Detective Burrows the opposite. Hosanna tells Detective Burrows that she was uncomfortable around Mr. Dickerson in her home, that he was grabbing her butt multiple times, and she didn't really feel like she was showing him that she was interested. So Hosanna says she's uncomfortable around him. And then she says that actually, Chris, Mr. Dickerson, and Stacy were arguing at one point in the night, and he cornered her against a wall. Why didn't they tell you about that? Doesn't fit into the narrative. He corners her against the wall in the home, so much so that Hosanna says, leave her alone, get away from her. And Stacy has to push Mr. Dickerson off of her. There is physical contact in the home. And also, think about what it looked like at that time. You're going to see photos of the house. You're going to be able to kind of get a layout of where the kitchen was to where the living room was, where Mr. Dickerson's body was found. It's a ranch-style home. It's small, no levels. You walk in, it's a living room. A kitchen is right next door. So think about all of that. When you are drinking the entire night, 19 years old, and this man who said there was going to be an after party does not follow through. You are in a stranger's home by yourself, and he is cornering you, towering over you. And that's what Hosanna says. He is over her. She remembers multiple times saying he is over her. And he's taller than Stacy by a lot. The prosecution had brought up the drinking and what Mr. Dickerson's, blood alcohol content was, and you're going to hear about the talk screen that was run by Detective Burson, and you're going to learn all about this when we discuss the autopsy. But keep in mind that Mr. Dickerson's blood alcohol content that night was 0.3. It's about 4 times over the legal limit. And again, he's at his house with his alcohol, asking for an after party. Miss Rodriguez wasn't trying to poison him or get him so drunk he didn't know what was going on. He's in his mid-30s and invited them over for an after party. That's what's going on. Use your common sense. You saw some autopsy photos and we talked about that metal file. And the prosecution said that Hosanna's version of events is that after, I guess the prosecution didn't tell you that in opening, but after she pushes Mr. Dickerson away, that somehow they end up in the living room, right? And Hosanna says that Stacy says, give me that weapon, give me that file. You'll hear the proffer. You'll hear how it actually goes. But then consider the file. Think about that. When you saw those photos, the sharp end is sticking out. And Hosanna describes the file as looked like it had white tape on the handle, the base of it. And you'll be able to see the file, and you'll be able to see the blunt part that is in Mr. Dickerson's neck is textured. It looks like it's wrapped. You will get to see the file, and you will get to look for yourself. Does it look like anything is broken off? Does it look like something is rough? Or does it look like it is a metal file that has a sharp end sticking out? So if somebody is reacting, trying to save themselves, think about the way that a weapon would have been used. The sharp end is not in, it's out. Think about it might be dangerous for yourself if you have something sharp in your hand and the sharp end is sticking out and you're defending yourself and you're using the blunt end in. That almost puts you at risk as well. It's not smart, it's not premeditated, it's not with after deliberation, it's not thought out, because she easily could have hurt herself as well. Why wouldn't you use a sharp end? It doesn't make sense. It's a panic decision to protect yourself, to save yourself. And when you look at the house and you look at the photos, you will see that there is a door to the living room. But we talked about that in jury selection. You all agreed there is no duty to retreat. But I do encourage you to look at the layout of the home and consider that if somebody is reacting in a panic and what that would look like and not feeling safe and the close quarters that you are in. we know that the house was burned, right? You saw the body worn in the prosecution's opening of the house, up in flames when GPD officers arrive. And that's a scene that probably nobody wishes to come upon. It is going to invoke emotions. It is sad. There is no way, I think, that you can look at this case and not find that there is an emotional component, because there just is. Somebody died, and 2 people are going to have to live with that for the rest of their lives. That's horrible. But you have to sometimes put that emotion aside and go back to the logic, and go back to the elements that the prosecution has to prove, and go back to what we talked about in jury selection, about those drastic measures. Think about how realistic it is that somebody panics and does something because they don't know what else is going on. And that's what happened. Horrible decisions are made, but it doesn't mean that something wasn't justified. Don't confuse the self-defense in a stranger's home, older than you, taller than you, being aggressive, being touchy, drinking, feeling like you can't get away. All of those things can still be true. So you're going to think about, when you hear about self-defense, when you think about what the legal standards are, reasonableness, right? The objective idea. But it's reasonable in the situation itself, in the context that you're presented with. The prosecution talked about guilt and regret. And of course, there's guilt and regret. Of course. Somebody's life was taken. That's horrible. We talked about this a lot in jury selection. We're all agree, murder is wrong. But it can be justified in self-defense. But that doesn't mean that it takes away regret, doesn't mean it takes away guilt, because that's a trauma that somebody has to live with for the rest of their lives. And so, again, I want to go back to this distortion, because you saw a portion of those Facebook messages, but that's not the entire story. And you'll get to hear more of the entire story throughout this trial, okay? Openings are just a snapshot of what the next week is going to entail, okay? But when you think about the guilt and the regret, I want you to go back to actually what the statements say. It's not just that, I didn't talk to anybody, I should have told people. It's every time I close my eyes, I see him. Hardest part of my life. I don't want to keep going. I feel alone. Those are human reactions, human responses to something horrible that just happened, to something horrible that probably nobody ever in their mind imagines that they would have to do to somebody else. Nobody asked for this. Nobody wants this. Definitely not Ms. Rodriguez. So now she has to live with that. And we talked in jury selection about, what if you don't call the police, right? Does that take away the justification? No, because you all had said, what if people don't believe you? That's also scary. So think about that. You don't think someone's going to believe you? You're just trying to live your life. There is no situation where somebody would act in self-defense and killing somebody else and then be happy about it. That is not a human reaction. That is not a human response. The guilt, the remorse, the panic, that's a human response. Ms. Rodriguez was 19 years old at a stranger's house under a situation she didn't think. Thought there was going to be more people. Thought it was going to be a party. And it went differently. It turned differently. He did corner her. She had to push him away, and it didn't stop. So think about all of that. That is what this case is about. It is about panic decisions, decisions made under pressure, relying on distorted facts that don't make sense to fit a narrative because you need that narrative. They need that narrative. But it doesn't go with logic, and it doesn't go with reason. Ms. Rodriguez, Stacy defended herself. She defended the woman that she loved to try to keep them safe. And that's what she did. She's not guilty of first-degree murder.
All right, thank you, Ms.
Good morning.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury, stating your full name, spelling your last?
My full name is Alan Charles Dickerson. That's Dickerson.
Sir, are you married?
Yes, I am.
To whom?
Elizabeth Ann Dickerson.
Sir, did you have a son?
I have two sons. My oldest son, Christopher Dickerson, deceased, and a younger son.
Sir, as it pertains to your son, Christopher Dickerson, what was his date of birth?
His date of birth was October 9th, 1985.
Sir, I'm going to approach with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1.
That is my son, Christopher Dickerson, with his beloved pet, Juna, a white German Shepherd, a cat, Ella, and what you don't see in the foreground is a chicken. A chicken. We also have chickens at the house.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1.
Any objection to one from the defense? 403. All right, the court will overrule the objection and admit into evidence states 1.
Sir, can you briefly describe your son, Christopher?
My son, Christopher, is a very...
Objection 403.
And can the parties approach? Witnesses answer can stand.
You may
Yes.
answer. Sir, where did your son, Christopher, live?
My son lived in Greeley at a house that he had purchased.
Objection, hearsay.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
You may answer, sir.
He lived in Greeley in a house that he had recently purchased.
Was that house at 2413 15th Avenue Court in Greeley, Weld County, Colorado?
Yes, it was.
Hearsay.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
Sir, approximately when had he purchased that house?
Hearsay.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
He had
May answer,
purchased the house probably only months before he was taken from us.
Sir, at that time, do you know if your son had any roommates at that house?
Yes, he did.
Going back a little bit in terms of discussing Chris, had he worked at Noosa Yogurt?
Yes, he worked at Noosa Yogurt.
In what capacity, sir?
He was a warehouse manager and shift supervisor.
Sir, I want to ask about some prior relationships to your son of Chris. At one point, did he have a very serious girlfriend named Bethany Cook?
Yes, he did. He was engaged to her.
And because of that, was the information shared that he had purchased an engagement ring?
Yes, he had purchased an engagement ring for her.
Do you know where that was from, sir?
I do. It was purchased from Zales Jewelers.
And was that something you had discussed previously with your son?
No, but I did see the ring, and I did see the receipt for the ring in his bedroom.
Okay. Now, ultimately, sir, did that engagement lead to marriage, or did it stop short of that?
It stopped short of marriage.
Okay. And, sir, to your knowledge, was that ring provided back to him?
Yes, the ring was provided back to him.
Are you confident of that?
Yes, I am.
And had you actually seen that then?
Yes, I had.
Sir, I want to transition to the time period of October 3rd, 2021. Where were you living at that time?
I was living at my primary residence, 710 Pine Drive, Windsor, Colorado.
Did you receive a visitor at the door that morning?
Yes, I did.
Who was that?
It was the coroner and victim assistance people.
Were you informed of a general situation
Yeah.
potentially involving your son?
Yes, I was.
And sir, did you assist with providing dental records or similar records?
Yes, I explained that Chris had a broken arm as a young child that required a steel plate in his arm, and he also regularly had dental visits.
Sir, at a certain point, were you contacted by the Greeley Police Department?
Yes, I was.
And who was the lead detective that contacted you, sir?
The lead detective was Detective Burrows.
You see him in the courtroom, sir?
Yes, he's at the DA's desk.
Now, sir, who was the power of attorney for your son?
I was the power of attorney for my son at that time.
Okay. And sir, how often would you get to see your son, Christopher?
I would see him on a regular basis, probably at least 2 to 3 times a week. We took care of his beloved pet, Juna, a white 7-year-old German Shepherd now. At the time, she was about 4 years old. He would leave her with us because he worked night shifts and long weekends. So we took care of Juna for him while he was not able to provide the attention that she needed.
Would you also speak over the phone or through text communications?
Yes, we would text each other and we would have communications over the phone, both him and his mother.
Are you very close with Chris?
Yes, I was very close with Chris.
Did you have access to several of his accounts, including bank accounts, phone numbers, phone records, and other?
Yes, I did. I was Chris's power of attorney until the time of his death.
And sir, did you assist in providing that information to Detective Burrows as part of the investigation?
Yes, I did.
Sir, as part of that, did you specifically deal with Google location records and aspects of the Google operating system for Chris?
Yes, I did.
And was that associated specifically with Chris's Google or Gmail email?
Yes, it was.
Sir, were you able to actually view that?
Yes, I was. I was able to see that the phone had moved in location on the day that he was taken from us and murdered until after the fire had started, or shortly after the fire had started, or been reported started. I shared that information with Detective Burrows once I had access to the account.
If I could approach with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 202.
202, go ahead.
Sir, do you recognize People's Exhibit 202?
Yes, I do.
And what is that, sir?
That is a SanDisk USB drive.
And sir, how are you familiar with that?
I use this SanDisk USB drive to provide Detective Burrows with 2 invocations of Google takeout dump of the Android device and zip files to maintain the integrity of that data once it was viewed.
So based on all of those aspects that you just talked about, are you pretty familiar with computers?
Yes, I am.
And you went through that process.
I went through that process.
And is People's Exhibit 202 the actual disk that you provided, or the USB thumb drive that you provided to Detective Burrows?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 202.
Any objection to 202?
No, that's voir dire.
Sure, go ahead.
Mr. Dickerson, would you mind if I grab that from you?
Absolutely.
Just have a few questions about this. There is no initial on the itself, right? On the thumb drive itself?
No, there's no identifying marks other than it's a SanDisk, probably a 32 gigabyte drive.
Okay. You had said no identifying marks, so I just want to clarify that a little bit for the jury. There's no such as like a serial number or something on here, correct?
No, but the files that exist on there have hash codes,
Okay.
and I can provide those hash codes
But
that specifically identify the files on the disk as being digital copies.
okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. But looking at this specifically, there's no identifying marks besides the fact that it's a SanDisk thumb drive, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I'll get this back to you for now. So you're unable to say with actual certainty that that is, as looking at it, the exact same thumb drive that you provided to Detective Burrows, correct?
This drive can be inserted in any PC. We can download a cyclic redundancy check, an MD5 sum, or a HA256 hash code. It will be unique to the files that are stored on my server and are stored in the cloud under an AWS S3 server.
So, Mr. Dickerson, I'm not trying to be confusing. I'm just wondering that specific thumb drive as we're looking at it, not the contents of what you believe to be on there, but just looking at that thumb drive, there's no identifying marks to suggest that that is the specific thumb drive that you gave Detective Burrows, correct?
It is not, because it was delivered in a different bag with a label on it, and this went into the evidence chain at the Greeley Police Department and labeled with their markings.
Okay, Your Honor, could we approach, please?
Burrows.
Let's just take a moment. I've handed you a piece of, I've handed you back the exhibit. I've also handed you the scissors, sir, as well as my computer. If you can just open the packaging with the
Okay.
scissors.
Okay.
It's fair to say you cut in the middle of that exhibit?
Yes, I did. I didn't want to destroy the label.
Okay. If you can take that thumb drive out.
Hopefully your laptop recognizes the drive, and it does.
You can go ahead and click on that, sir.
What I'm clicking on is a Google directory. I expect to see 4 files on that in that directory. Those are takeout files. They're Google takeout files. They're download.
And Mr. Dickerson, again, it's really important that you just
Okay,
respond to
I'm sorry.
questions.
Yes,
You recognize that?
I certainly do.
Is that exactly what you thought it would be?
It is exactly what I thought it would be, and the date, yes, it is exactly what I thought it
And
would
is
be.
that exactly what you provided?
It is exactly what I provided.
Now I'd move for 202, Your Honor.
Any further objection?
You stand on our previous objection, and then in regard to the contents.
All right, the court will overrule the objection and admit into evidence states 202.
Those are my questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Any cross-examination?
Mr. Dickerson, I just have a few questions for you.
Yes,
You mentioned that Chris was working at NUSA around the time in October, right?
that is correct.
Okay. And he had been fired, to your knowledge, for like a whistleblower kind of complaint?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And is your understanding that he was a little angry about losing his job at that point?
Sure.
And so, Mr. Dickerson, when Chris was let go, he wasn't working around the time in October, right? He had been let go prior to October 2nd and 3rd?
Yes, he had been let go prior to that.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yes. Mr. Flores, if you'll raise your right hand. Sir, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, go and have a seat. Mr. Praley, you may begin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please state your full name, spelling your last for the record?
Name Joshua Flores, Flores.
How are you currently employed?
I am currently a police officer for the city of Greeley.
How long, sir?
5 years.
All right, because you're our first officer to testify, can you just generally discuss about the training that goes into becoming a police officer?
Absolutely. Consists of about 4 or 5 months of academy, followed by another 3 months of in-house training, including street work. So probably about 7 to 8 months before we're actually on the street as patrol officers.
And can you describe then what it means to be a patrol officer?
Absolutely. So our duties include just responding to calls for service, investigating allegations of criminal incidents, making arrests based on our findings and investigations.
What is your current position with the Greeley Police Department?
I am currently assigned to patrol as a patrol officer.
And is that the same capacity as you were on October 3rd of 2021?
Yes, sir.
Sir, on October 3rd, 2021, were you dispatched to a 2413 15th Avenue court?
That is correct.
Where is that located in terms of what city?
That is in the southern part of Greeley, central southern part of Greeley.
Is that Weld County, Colorado?
That is correct, yes.
Can you describe the general process of how you receive information from dispatch to actually go to a scene?
Absolutely. So dispatch will air the information to us, that is through the radio. In addition to that, we do have our computers in our vehicles that also provide us additional information.
All right. So fair to say that you don't actually get to hear a 911 call as it's occurring?
That is correct.
You're receiving notes as to where to go and what the situation is?
Correct.
Okay. Sir, we're going to take a moment by stipulation to play the 911 call, but I want to make it clear you didn't actually hear that on the night in question of October 3rd.
That is correct.
Your Honor, by stipulation of the parties, the people are moving to admit and publish People's Exhibit 147 at this time.
And from the defense, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, the court will admit into evidence by stipulation, states 147, and you may publish.
I'm next door. Okay, what's your house address? 2413 15th Avenue Court. Okay. Colorado. What's the word? I think that's from that 24. That's on fire. It's at 2413.
Mr. Praley, can you pause that and can the parties approach?
I think there's someone in there.
Ladies and gentlemen, just give us a second. We're going to try and fix this audio issue.
Now, is the house on fire?
Okay, what's the address?
I can't see the number. I'm next door,
Okay, what's your house
two
address?
four zero, 2413, 2413 15th Avenue Corner,
Okay,
City,
and
Colorado.
where is the
I
house?
think that
From that address,
Two,
where's
four.
the house that's on fire?
it's at 2413 15th Avenue Court.
Okay,
I think there's someone in there.
okay, what's your phone number in case we get disconnected?
I don't know, man.
Okay,
I'm in Greeley, Colorado.
okay, I'm trying
Two, four, one,
970-473-9047,
three.
is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay,
that sounds good. That house is fire. Somebody's in there, I think.
okay, I have this, and just to confirm, is that gonna be a house or an apartment?
If that house is on fire, man,
Okay,
you need to get the firemen here.
they're coming as fast as they can, okay, what makes you think that someone's inside?
Because there's a dog barking, and there's a car in this place. Man, you gotta get to the fire department.
Okay.
Please.
They're coming as fast as they can, okay?
Okay.
Just stay on the line with me. Did you go into the
Okay.
house?
Hell no, it's burned like crazy.
Okay.
It's 2413 15th Avenue Court,
I have them
Greeley,
coming.
Colorado.
I have them coming. I have all the information in here. What was your name?
My name's Mike.
Okay, Mike, do you know the people that live there?
I just know Chris. Chris. The guy's name is Chris who lives here.
Okay.
Chris.
I need you to get away from the house to make sure you're at a safe distance, okay?
Yeah. Chris. Dang, damn it.
Do you know what part of the house is on fire, or is it
The
just
whole house,
everywhere?
the whole front of the house is on fire, man. The garage and everything.
Okay.
I hear sirens. I hope that's them coming.
They're coming as fast as they can. Is he the
Okay,
only
that's
one that
reasonable.
lives there?
I think he is, yeah. Here they come. I see the light. Here's the police.
Okay, and I just need
We-
to, go ahead.
We've been trying to wake him up. We don't know if there's someone in there or not.
Who is that you're
I
talking
think,
to?
I think Chris is in there, the policeman.
Okay, I'll go ahead and let you go, okay?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, bye-bye.
Bye.
Sorry about the audio issue, sir. Now you've been able to hear that, but the information you had would be written on a screen.
It would have been written on the screen or aired through dispatch briefly, yes.
What time do you arrive to this location?
By recollection, approximately 5:45 in the morning.
Okay. Can you just generally describe to the jury what your observations were when you got there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as my partner and I arrived, we saw residents completely engulfed in flames. As we approached, obviously, we did see some neighbors yelling, trying to, I guess, get the attention of the neighbor that was potentially inside. Everything was completely on fire.
And sir, during this time period, can you describe what you're wearing?
Yes, so in addition to my uniform, I am wearing a body-worn camera that captures the general aspect of what I'm looking at.
Sir, I'm going to approach with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 5. Have you been able to watch this today?
I have.
How can you tell that you've been able to watch it?
I have signed and initialed, or I have initialed and dated this.
Is People's Exhibit 5 a fair and accurate copy of your body-worn camera as it pertains to first arriving dealing with the fire?
That is correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 5 with permission to publish.
All right, thank you. Any objection from the defense?
Would incorporate our previous record, but just note 403 if the court wants us to approach.
Why don't you go ahead and approach just a I will admit state's motion 5 into the record, and Mr. Pralia, you may publish where appropriate.
Thank you. Sir, to be clear, is there audio in the beginning or does it take some time?
So there's usually about a 30-second buffer period with no audio.
Thank you.
This is Officer Flores, Green Police. Anybody in there? Is anybody in there? We don't know. The dog's good. We've been trying to get him up for. Who lives there, sir? His name is Chris. I think his car is still in the back. Yeah. Fire station. Yeah, bro.
Okay, sir. Would that have been your body-worn camera for the actual fire portion?
That is correct.
Did you also have other duties that would have taken place then after fire came?
Yeah, the biggest one being scene security, just making sure nobody gets in and out, shouldn't be there, what have you.
Okay. And ultimately, after that scene security happened and the fire was put out, can you describe if a body was discovered?
That is correct. I was made aware that the firefighters did discover a body inside of the residence.
Okay. And ultimately, to your knowledge, when you were on scene, what occurred with that body?
Objection, hearsay.
All right, and Mr. Braley, is this for effect on the listener?
It's personal observation plus effect on the listener.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
So the body was placed into an ambulance, and I provided security for the ambulance specifically for a short period of time.
So you were actually looking at the body?
Not directly, but obviously as they're loading it up, yes.
Okay. Sir, as part of your duties after that, did you also help conduct a neighborhood canvass?
That is correct. To my recollection, fire investigator Cobb showed up on scene, kind of assumed that role where I was at, and then I started canvassing the area for any footage or witnesses or anything.
Footage or witnesses?
Correct.
And can you just define what a neighborhood canvass means?
Neighborhood canvass, generally we're going door to door, trying to see if anybody heard anything, saw anything, if there's any cameras on any of the premises, and if there are, trying to review footage of any video that may have captured anything that could give us any insight or leads to follow up on.
Okay. Sir, did you conduct that neighborhood canvass at an address of 2436 15th Avenue Court with a homeowner of the name of Barbara Hillis? That
is correct.
All right, sir. And specifically, did you identify that residence of 2436 15th Avenue Court as having surveillance footage?
That is correct. There was a camera on the front of the property.
Okay. Can you generally describe what you did then?
So based on the fact that we did locate a camera, contacting the resident to see if they had footage. In this instance, she did have some video surveillance footage of some vehicles in the area.
Hearsay.
I'm sorry?
Hearsay.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
After reviewing the footage, that's collected and placed into evidence.
Okay. And so you're actually there on scene like we would have just seen. This would have taken place right after your body-worn camera that we just watched in.
That is correct.
Okay. And were you actually able to observe certain clips and incidents that night that would have happened just prior to your arrival?
Correct. That is correct.
Was it also capturing the fact of your arrival? Specifically, we saw in the body-worn cam that when you go, there are lights on the top of your vehicles.
Yes, I do recall watching a video of me entering the area from the camera.
Okay. And so you were able to actually see yourself on that footage?
That is correct.
Do you believe that that footage was altered or manipulated in any way based on your observations that night and seeing yourself?
I do not.
Sir, I'm going to approach with what's been marked as Exhibits 2, 2A, B, C, and D. Sir, I'm going to start with 2A for you, okay?
Okay.
Do you recognize that, sir?
I do.
What is that?
This will be a clip of the video surveillance footage I watched.
Okay. And would all of these have been from the same address at 2436 15th Avenue Court?
They would be all from the same resident, yes.
Okay. Your Honor, by stipulation as to 2A?
Ms. Trujillo, Ms. Devereaux, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. By stipulation, the court will admit into evidence 2A, and you may publish when appropriate.
If we could publish 2A? That would be much earlier in the night. Is that fair based on the timestamps?
That is correct.
Have you reviewed other clips dealing with 2A through 2G about the aspects of events that you saw during that time period?
I'm sorry, are you referring to like the couple-hour time frame?
Correct.
That is correct.
And can you just tell the jury, when you were there on scene that night, what were the observations that you had of the video at that time?
From what I recall watching the video, I remember seeing a silver sedan enter and leave the area a few times in the span of a few hours. I think beginning around 2:50 in the morning, approximate time, then they left around that time, came back around 3:17 in the morning. Then again, you see the same vehicle leaving the area again around approximately 5 in the morning, where they return again a half hour later. And then they leave shortly after that again. At approximately 5:45, I do remember that's when we show up on scene.
Okay. And to be very clear, I've referenced we've just published 2A, but was that entire security system and that footage captured after that point?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to approach just in general with 2, and then also reference that there were other clips of the events that you noted in your report. Is that fair to say, sir?
That is correct.
And so overall, with the entire surveillance that would have been captured on People's Exhibit 2, do you have any concerns if the system was working properly that night?
I do not have any concerns, no.
Okay. Do you believe in that short time period in any way, shape, or form that it was materially altered or adjusted?
I do not.
Your Honor, at this time, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 2.
Any objection to 2?
Confrontation.
All right. Can the parties approach? All right. The court will admit into evidence States 2, and then Mr. Prele, you may publish the clips. Will you just designate them as you play them?
Your Honor, I think it makes sense to publish them through a different witness
Okay,
at a
that's
different time.
That's fine.
Those are my questions at this time.
All right. Thank you. Any cross-examination from the defense? Go ahead, please.
No cross, thank you.
No cross. All right. Thank you. Sir, you can leave the witness stand. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. the state may call their next witness.
Your Honor, the people call Officer Austin Berkeley.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Sir, if you can please come forward and before you sit down, raise your right hand for me. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead and have a seat. Mr. Prele, you may begin when you're ready. Officer, can you just make sure you get as close to that microphone as is reasonable?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for your patience. Will you please introduce yourself to the jury, stating your full name, spelling your last?
Yes, my full name is Austin Berkeley. Last name spelled Burckley.
How are you employed?
I'm employed by the Greeley Police Department as a police officer
How long have you been employed as a police officer with Greeley PD?
since 2021.
Okay. What was your duty on October 3rd, 2021?
My duties were, as a police officer, just taking routine calls, calls for service, investigating any crimes from misdemeanors or petty offenses up to felonies.
Okay. And sir, were you on a specific shift or with a specific partner at that time?
Yes, I was.
And who was that?
The partner was Officer Flores, and the shift was Lates.
And is that the individual that just walked out of the courtroom?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Ultimately, were the both of you dispatched for a fire at 2413 15th Avenue Court in Greeley, Weld County, Colorado?
Yes.
All right. Can you just basically tell us what your observations were at the time?
Upon arrival at the address?
Correct.
As we arrived on scene or at the residence, I noticed big flames coming out of the house, emerging from the windows, just smoke billowing out of the house.
Okay. And sir, were you in full uniform at that time?
Yes, I was.
And does that include being equipped with a body-worn camera?
Yes.
If I could approach with People's Exhibit 6?
6, go ahead.
You recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It is a CD that has my body-worn camera footage on it.
And does that pertain to the fire and your response to that address?
Yes.
Is it fair and accurate?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I move for the admission of 6.
All right, thank you. From the defense, any objection?
Incorporate our previous objection.
In D45?
Correct.
All right, thank you. Noting the defendant's objection, I will overrule the objection and admit into evidence State 6, and you may publish where appropriate.
Can the court help me with timing? I know you have an obligation at what time. I don't want to take up more time than I have.
How lengthy is the?
7 to 10 minutes?
We should be fine. We should be fine. Go ahead.
Well, I'll publish it later. Actually, I think that makes sense. Sir, would yours have been very similar to Officer Flores?
Yes.
Okay.
Objection calls for speculation.
I will sustain the objection, Mr. Praley. If you want to ask additional foundation on that, you can.
Were you both wearing a body-worn camera that day?
Yes.
Were you both there?
Yes.
Were you very close to each other?
Yes.
Do you think it would be similar?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'll overrule the objection.
Yes.
Okay. Sir, we've just published Officer Flores in dealing with the fire. Ultimately, the fire department came.
Yes.
Okay. And, sir, what was your role after the fire department came?
My role was to canvass the area for any potential video footage that was captured by the surrounding houses.
Okay. And did you do that?
Yes, I did.
Specifically, did you speak with a neighbor, Joe McDowell, at 2405 15th Avenue Court?
Yes, I did.
Is that in Greeley, Weld County, Colorado?
Yes, it is.
And in speaking with that homeowner in your neighborhood canvas, did you observe whether or not he would have any kind of surveillance system?
Yes, I did.
And what kind of system was that?
It was a Ring doorbell camera.
And sir, as you were there doing that neighborhood canvas, were you able to pull up portions of that?
Yes, I was.
Were you able to watch certain events on that while on scene?
Yes.
Okay. Specifically, were you able to watch events that would have just transpired, such as you guys arriving?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any concerns about the fairness and the accuracy of that footage in terms of what you were viewing?
No.
Okay. I'm going to approach with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 4.
4, go ahead.
Sir, do you recognize People's Exhibit 4?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
Has my initials on it and dated.
Okay. And so you reviewed it in anticipation of your testimony today.
Yes, I did.
And as it pertains to that disk and the files contained on that disk, do you have any concerns that they were materially altered in any way, shape, or form?
No.
Is that specifically the video that you obtained that night from that neighbor at that location?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 4.
Any objection to 4?
Confrontation.
All right, the court will overrule the objection and admit into evidence states 4.
Those are my questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Any cross-examination? Go ahead, please.
No cross-examination. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sir, you can leave the witness stand. Thank you, sir. If you'll come forward. And before you sit down, if you can raise your right hand for me. Sir, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, thank you. Go ahead and have a seat. And Mr. Praley, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name?
I'm Detective Johnny Blair with the Greeley Police Department. Blair is B-L-A-I-R.
How are you employed?
Officer with the City of Greeley Police Department, currently assigned to investigations.
Can you describe what it means to be assigned to investigations?
Yeah, as a police officer, you can test to be in a unit more specialized, in this case investigations, where you are then a detective, either property persons or a gang unit. So right now I'm in the property investigations unit.
Can you outline your experience as a law enforcement officer?
I was with the Weld County Sheriff's Office for 2 years and then got hired by the Greeley Police Department in 2016. So I'm going on my 9th year.
Sir, what capacity were you serving in on October 3rd, 2021?
I was a property detective at that point.
Okay. Can you describe what your role in this case then was?
As a property detective, we handle robberies, burglaries, motor vehicle theft, fraud, and arsons. So I was called in to assist as there was clearly an arson.
Okay.
Objection. Invading the province of the jury.
I'm sorry?
Invading the province of the jury.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
All right, sir. On October 3rd, 2021, do you actually go to the scene?
Yes, I do.
And can you describe, at that point, did you see a body?
When I arrived, the fire department had already been on scene. So I did eventually see a body that had been discovered in the fire.
And where was that?
It was in the back of an ambulance.
Okay. So it had been moved from the living room in the residence?
Correct.
All right. Did you assist in taking photos at that point?
I did.
Did you also then assist in a neighborhood canvass for surveillance footage?
I did.
And would that have been in conjunction with other members of the Greeley Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. So for example, we've previously admitted People's Exhibit 4, the surveillance footage from 2405 15th Avenue Court. Were you assisting with those ring videos?
Yes, I spoke to several neighbors in
Okay.
the neighborhood.
And several neighbors in that area that had surveillance. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
And during that time, as a detective, were you looking at the different vantage points for each of the surveillance systems?
Yes,
Okay. And were you able to see corroboration between the events, for example, the fire and Greeley arriving?
I guess explain that.
Yeah. For example, you know that you arrived at a certain point and the fire department arrived at a certain point. Were you able to look on those videos and see certain events like that occurring?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Sorry, probably a poor question as we're going through the lunch hour here. My bad. You go to several neighbors during that time period. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And so one of those was Mr. McDowell's that I had discussed at the 2405 address, was another one at 2406 15th Avenue Court, which would have been Mr. Thomas Taylor's address.
I believe so, yes.
And when you were out there on scene at that time and then later, were you able to actually view those videos there on an iPad?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And were you able to then figure out the time frame in terms of daylight savings time and being 1 hour behind, those types of events?
That is correct.
Okay. Were there certain incidents or events that you saw captured on that surveillance when you were just there on scene initially
Yes.
that were notable to you?
Yes.
Can you describe those to the jury?
The video on the iPad specifically.
Correct.
So the timeline showed that a vehicle had arrived at the house that had been on fire. And then when it left, the lights were off, which is not typical. And then that,
Objection calls for speculation.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
You can continue, sir.
so, and then the car, at least same looking car, returned to the scene, and a flash of light, it was seen through the main front window. And then the car leaves again, and the house is seen going up in flames, giving us reason to believe that there was foul play.
Okay. And was all that video captured?
Yes.
And ultimately, from that homeowner, do you go back for videos on October 16th as well?
Yes, I don't know if I physically collected all the video in this case, but I was aware that it was being requested and archived.
Okay. And able to say that it was all captured from that particular residence that we're referring to, that of Mr. Thomas Taylor at 2406 15th Avenue Court?
Yes.
Okay. Did it appear to you in any way that that video had been altered or manipulated as you viewed it?
Not that I knew of, no.
Okay. I'm going to approach with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 3. In general, sir, do you recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a fair and accurate copy of the incidents and events that you saw not only there on scene, but then later on that disc?
I don't obviously know what this particular disc contains, but yes, this was what evidence was stored on and booked.
Okay. And specifically, there are tag numbers associated with your reports and docking that. Is that fair?
Yes.
And that would correspond to G21 17441?
I believe so.
Okay. And that would have been associated to your report specifically in this case?
Yes.
And you recall actually doing that? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you recall viewing that evidence?
I viewed some of the evidence, yes.
Or some of the events?
Yes.
But it was all captured from the same system?
Correct.
Do you have any reason to believe that's not fair and accurate?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 3.
Any objection to 3?
Yes. Can we approach?
Yes, please. thank you. I've sustained the objection. And ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a good point to go ahead and break. And